Welcome, everybody, to the other side of the glass, the Facebook Live interview series from us, the Just Add Bourbon Podcast. I'm Jimmy Don Kerr.
I'm Brad Broaddus.
I'm JD Darren.
And it is another beautiful evening here in the hills of Eastern Kentucky. And before I introduce our guest, I want to make sure we remind everybody to share this live feed. We want as many people to get out because you guys are going to find this guest incredibly interesting. I guarantee that. So we want as many people to see it as possible. And then two, of course, like we want to ask everybody, go to our YouTube page, subscribe. We're really trying to get the subscribers up on that. We've had crazy feedback from the show that JD and I did Sunday. JD, I'm sure you've gotten the same feedback I have. I said it's been crazy. So guys, tonight, our very special guest is none other than Vince Palamara. Mr. Palamara is considered to be the leading civilian literary Secret Service expert, having interviewed and corresponded with over 80 Secret Service agents who have guarded over a dozen former U.S. presidents. The author of 5 books, which include Survivor's Guilt, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, and Honest Answers about the Murder of President John F. Kennedy. Vince, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you very much, guys, and thank you to all your listeners. It's an honor. Appreciate it.
Cool. So, Vince, we just kind of start the show out the same way. Just kind of give us a little background on yourself, where you're from, and that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, born and raised. 53, going on 54. And my interest in both President Kennedy's life and death really began at the age of 12. I'll make this long story short for your listeners. The age of 12, I started to collect stamps and coins, a lot of foreign stamps and coins that had images of President Kennedy. And unbeknownst to me at the time, my mom and dad, who were still doing great, big fans of President Kennedy, and they just regaled me stories of his life and death and whatnot. And I went to my local library, picked up books, and I became hooked. One thing led to another. Zoom up to 1988, the 25th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. I really got the bug about it as far as doing something more than just reading. And I started to focus like a laser beam on the Secret Service agents, the men charged with guarding the president. So I started to, like, whenever there was newsreels, films, photos, whatnot, on television and documentaries and this, that, and the other, I would always look almost like past President Kennedy and look at the agents. I just became fascinated with them. And then one thing led to another from there. Again, zooming up to the 90s, early 1990s, I gave a presentation in Fredonia, New York, in front of about roughly 60 authors and researchers, some pretty big heavyweights too, including Harrison Livingstone, who is like a 3-time New York Times bestselling author. And the consensus was, and the time was only 25, they were like, wow, Vince, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I never really gave them a second thought. You should do something with this. Because at the time, I was just dealing mainly with secondary sources and a little bit of primary sources. That really got me going that I got to do something with this. So at the time, I had a job that I did a lot of cold calling and no problem talking to strangers when on the phone. So again, it's where the internet really kicked in information, as far as, just going through newspaper archives and whatnot. I would start to contact all these former agents who were long in retirement all over the country. And this leads us basically from then up to the current time. And basically the thrust of my information is the thing that I contacted a lot of these gentlemen. Because it turns out that they said things that went against official history. A lot of these gentlemen never spoke on the record before. So I always make the analogy, it'd be like Abraham Lincoln, even though the Secret Service wasn't around at the time. It'd be if somebody had an oral history of like Lincoln's guards and what they said and felt and so on, it'd be a valuable repository. So that led me to write books on the assassination related to the Secret Service primarily, and we'll go through the details, but that's basically an overview, basically all the information I garnered. And I also interviewed and corresponded with a lot of Parkland doctors and Bethesda medical personnel on both sides after the assassination that not only, treated President Kennedy in Dallas, but also, did the autopsy in Bethesda,
Go ahead, Brad.
So can you dive in a little more? You said that you were kind of looking, reading about JFK, and what was it about the Secret Service that stood out to you? Like, because you said you almost wanted to look past that and look at these guys who were actually guarding the president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what it did it for me was, again, I guess timed with the age of 12, that I also became interested in a classic fictional show on the 19th century Secret Service called The Wild Wild West with Robert Conrad and Ross Martin. And in my mind, the two almost merged in a way. I became fascinated with the Secret Service at the same time, I became fascinated with President Kennedy's life and death. And the more I read, the less I saw was written on the Secret Service, which is the gentlemen that were in charge of guarding the president, and the fact that he was assassinated under their watch. I figured, well, conspiracy or no conspiracy, wow, if these guys would have did maybe a better job, maybe he would have lived. But then part of me thought, well, maybe that's a little harsh. Let's see what the evidence shows and whatnot. And yeah, just through the years, what these gentlemen told me, and just comparing with films and photos and document releases, I realized that. Now, I do believe there's a conspiracy. We can go into that. But even if someone out there doesn't think there was a conspiracy, it's sad to say it is what it is. If these guys would have did their normal professional job, President Kennedy would have lived. And that's basically the thrust of my books right there, just in a very general way. Yeah.
Brad, do you want to go?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I think is a lot of people. Now, there's obviously different ideas of who people think did what, who's responsible, but a lot of people feel that there's definitely a conspiracy involved. So I know with your knowledge of the Secret Service, in your opinion, was it incompetence or was it a hit job or was it both?
It was a combination of both. Like 90% of these men or more were quote unquote squeaky clean. They were just following orders. They were doing their duty, but there was a few bad apples in the bunch. And I don't mess around in my books. I even named 3 agents that they're all passed away now. Floyd Boring, who was the head of he was the second in charge of the White House detail. He planned a Texas trip from the Secret Service's point of view. And he's basically the architect of agents not being on the back of the car. You might say to yourself, oh, wow, what's that mean? Well, not always, but many times agents rode on the rear of President Kennedy's limousine or jogged or ran beside the car. And he did it on the prior trip in Florida, Tampa, Florida, and he gets to Texas, and all of a sudden the agents aren't there. And the story was, by the Warren Commission, the official government story was, well, President Kennedy didn't want them there. And President Kennedy was around to defend himself. And at the time, I was a little skeptical, but I had nothing to go on until I spoke to all these agents. And one after another, they're telling me, oh, that's not true. President Kennedy never ordered us to do anything. He didn't order us off the back of the car. He was a very nice man. And it was almost like they were reading cue cards, but I was calling them all over the country, and they didn't know that I spoke to this gentleman. One hand didn't know what the other. So it was very honest, basically cold calling these guys at the time, early 1990s. In fact, what really did it for me was September 27, 1992, I spoke to the head of the White House detail, who was Gerald Bain, B-E-H-N. Luckily for me, I did. About 7 months later, he died of cancer. A very lucid, very intelligent gentleman. And I just, at the time, I threw by him and said, it's a shame that I understand reading some books that President Kennedy didn't want you guys in the back of the car. And he interrupted me. He says, I don't remember President Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. You look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. I was floored. I was Stanford. I could not believe what I was hearing. I, just couldn't believe it. And then, like I said, one after another, when I spoke to a lot of his colleagues, they were all telling me the same thing. And for your listeners, they might say, okay, what does that all mean? What that means is, it's sad to say, but it is what it is. The Secret Service created this mythology that President Kennedy was difficult to protect. He sort of had it coming in a way because he didn't want these security measures. He didn't want the agents in the back of the car. He didn't want the protective bubble on his car. He didn't want motorcycles beside the car and so on. And through my research, interviewing these gentlemen, looking at primary documents and so on and so forth, and also prior trips, films, and photos, I realized that, my God, President Kennedy didn't order these men to do anything, and the buck stops with them. And so, beyond the question of conspiracy, we'll get into that in a moment, but just on a matter of, President Kennedy, he could have survived this, just like President Reagan survived the assassination attempt, and President Truman survived the assassination attempt, and a couple others. My answer is yes, he should have survived Dallas. Conspiracy or no conspiracy, these gentlemen, it still amazes me this day because they could have rained on my parade. There wouldn't have been books. I always tell people, if these guys didn't tell me what they told me, that would have been the end of the road, but instead it was the opposite. It just opened up Pandora's box. They're all telling me stuff that goes against official history, not just about the agents being on the back of the car. And for your listeners, what that means is if they would have been on the back of the car, they would have been a few precious feet away, shots ring out. They're there to cover and evacuate the president. Anyway, you've seen the famous video of President Reagan being shot. Those men only had their agile minds, fleetness of foot, and they were able to cover and evacuate the president in mere seconds as Johnny Cleese fired his gun. And here these guys were in a souped-up, Lincoln Continental limousine, and the shots ring out, and President Kennedy and all the doctors said he would have survived the neck wound, which was not fatal. There was time to act. The Secret Service, a few seconds is like a half hour to you and me. They're trained to react like that, and even common sense. Again, that's another issue. When people see the famous Zapruder film of the assassination, beyond the gruesomeness, the details about the shots and so on, people that do look say, wow, that driver of that car, if only he would have hit the gas, if only he wouldn't have looked back. And I noticed, wow, he didn't look back once, but he looked back twice. And when I viewed the testimony, I was like, oh my gosh, the driver, Bill Greer, my second suspect after Floyd Boring, well, he disobeyed a direct order from his superior, Roy Kellerman, right next to him in the limousine, to get out of line when he'd been hit. He disobeys him and looks back a second time and looks back at Kennedy until the fatal shot makes its mark. All he did is he faced forward, hit the gas. He lied under oath to the Warren Commission. The official government investigation said, oh, he never caught sight of President Kennedy, and I hit the gas under what was probably the second shot. So it's just amazing. Even people the few people out there that do believe Oswald acted alone even could see that, Bill Greer, he really burdens, he was responsible for the success of the assassination because he hits the gas and obeys orders and even just, swerves the car a little bit and Kennedy lives. So that's another huge area right there. And another thing, too, is even people I just meet off the street that know a little bit about assassination, they would say, yeah, I heard President Kennedy didn't want that top on his limousine. Is that true? Turns out it's not true. Agent I spoke to, Sam Kinney, who was the driver of the follow-up car, which was the car right behind President Kennedy's limousine. No one had ever spoke to him before until I did. And I spoke to him 3 times in Lincoln. A lot of these interviews are on audio tape, too. Some of them I got on my YouTube channel. Really fascinating stuff. But Sam told me that he was solely responsible for that top's not being on the car. President Kennedy had nothing to do with it. And he said his staff had nothing to do with it. And he said it was at the time, it was the early 90s, one of his 30-year regrets. Now, not to throw a monkey wrench, I don't think Sam did it in a sinister fashion, but what was sinister was blaming President Kennedy after the fact, which is what the government did. They basically threw that on us. Everybody stopped looking at the Secret Service. They were like, wow, they only had a few seconds to react. This was fate. It was meant to be, and then you realize it wasn't meant to be. What about all the other trips where he was protected properly? And they're blaming him for security deficiency. It has nothing to do with him. It really throws up the red flags. And another major issue is many times the limousine was surrounded by motorcycles, which was in a diamond formation. They're there to cover and evacuate. Obviously, they're armed police officers. They're there to spot trouble, and obviously they act as a shield around the car. If hypothetically, if somebody was firing from the front, they would be able to see that, be a professional eye near witnesses, and again, they're armed and whatnot. Well, supposedly, again, the story is that the night before the assassination, due to the president's orders, the officers were told to stay back from the limousine. And they went down to a measly 4 outriders. Usually there's 4 to 6 on each side. They were down to 4. And to make matters worse, they were told to stay behind the limousine's rear wheels. It's a totally useless formation, left Kennedy a sitting duck. And then when you find out again through my primary research, which is my first book, Survivor's Guilt, was the very first one, realizing, wow, this is not true. That President Kennedy did not order the motorcycles away. Again, the buck stops the Secret Service. It goes right back to them. Why are some agents and officials blaming President Kennedy? Some people might say it was CYA. They were worried, justifiably so, about losing their jobs, pensions, and going before Congress, this, that, and the other, and the ramifications of losing a president. But because this was before Watergate, before investigative journalism, when people basically were naive and believed their government, they basically got away with it. President Kennedy was running to defend themselves, and people believed the pablum at the time. Well, looks like President Kennedy didn't want this done, this done, this done, this done. All right, well then I guess we'll have to look elsewhere for any, negligence or any other suspects and whatnot. And again, it was all just the happenstance that this arose, for these issues.
So a lot of these, a lot of these things come up about, well, They didn't do it because the president wanted to do this or didn't do that. But wouldn't it be fair to say that the Secret Service would be the one group in the country that in most instances actually tells the president what they have to do?
Exactly. That's another one of my big findings. The first one was about finding out that President Kennedy had nothing to do with ordering the agents off the car. Second major finding, I documented like crazy, and actually several of my books, but the first one primarily, that President Truman said this, and also Lyndon Johnson and President Clinton all copied and said the same thing, that the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States had, and that's by law, meaning that it's not about legislation and passing bills and stuff like that. It's about his security, that the president could say, I don't want this done or that done, and they just laugh in his face and just, like Clint Hill came clean in 2010, an agent who famously guarded Jacqueline Kennedy and President Kennedy. He said that, well, sometimes the president would tell you something to do, but that doesn't mean you had to do it. And what we would always do is listen to the president, and we would do what we felt was best anyway. Shocking interview. I guess he was coming clean for history. I don't know if he realized that the tape, the camera was on him or whatnot, but there's a lot of truth in that. And for your listeners, what that means is most people would think, wow, this is the leader of the free world, the commander in chief. This isn't some little butler or some little errand boy, a Secret Service agent. He can't order the president what to do. And actually, you're right. You're absolutely right. When it comes to his security, again, quoting President Truman, Clinton, and Lyndon Johnson, the Secret Service is the only boss the President of the United States really had. So hypothetically, even if President Kennedy ordered the man to do this, that, and the other, which he didn't, but just hypothetically speaking, they would supersede him and say, sorry, sir, we're going to do this, or just not even tell him and do it anyway. In fact, actually, probably the biggest, what I like to call smoking gun for some people out there, most people don't anymore, but some people still want to hold on to the mythology that President Kennedy didn't want certain security measures done. They say, hey, Vince, well, what about, ordering the men off the car? There's nobody there in Elm Street when the assassination begins. But what they also fail to realize, well, the block before Main Street, Clint Hill is riding on the rear limousine, holding onto the grab handles. And he does this 4 times briefly of his own volition. And that right there knocks out the fact it was a presidential order. Because if it was, why did Clint Hill disobey, in quotes, and get on the back of the car? See, it was only it's little old amateur me out in the wilderness that was discovering these things. No one looked at the Secret Service. I'm telling you right now, when I went to that conference in 1991, all these guys were old enough to be my father or grandfather, and some of them were best-selling authors. Told me I never looked at the Secret Service. Everyone was focused on the FBI, the CIA, the mafia. Never looked at them. And again, I just always, tell people, I'm not saying the Secret Service as an organization had anything to do with this. I'm just saying there was a couple bad apples, actually 3. And that I think they had inside information about a plot, and they let it happen. It's action through inaction. It's not so much pulling triggers. It's just basically a couple seconds, mission accomplished by doing nothing. And that's what it is. And after the fact, the president's not around to defend himself. Hey, let's blame him for this, that, and that. And it's a very gullible public. See, now you wouldn't get away with it. Just too much with the media, internet, social media, investigative journalism. But back in 63, 64, it was a very naive country. There was no internet. Everybody believed the news, all the news is fit to print. New York Times, everybody believed it like it was the gospel. My mom and dad even told me something. Said, Vince, 6 people could have killed Kennedy. We were in such grief. All the details went in one ear and out the other. And that was to their advantage because people didn't care about the details. They were so devastated. It wasn't until years later that muckrakers like me and other people found these things out. So, yeah.
Can I just say, holy shit, that's a lot. No, but it sounds like a comedy of errors going on here. But was there anything leading up to that travel down the Dallas Road that would let somebody know that he was in trouble or in danger?
Yeah, well, what they should have done is they actually planned out the motorcade, the Secret Service in connection with the Dallas police. What they did is they obviously scoped out the potential motorcade routes. And what they should have done is gone straight down Main Street. In fact, when FDR traveled in Dallas, he traveled straight down Main Street. And Governor Connolly, governor of Texas, even testified to the Warren Commission that was the standard parade route going straight down Main Street. And for your listeners, you might say to yourself, well, okay, what's that mean, Vince? What that means, if they would have traveled straight down Main Street and not taken that Houston Elm Street turn by the book depository, they would have been going at a much faster rate of speed and further away from both the book depository and the infamous grassy knoll in front of them. Yeah. By going that silly, unnecessary jog, they slowed the limousine down, took these dangerous turns, and it was in a warehouse district because the book depository was a warehouse, okay, open windows and whatnot. and they left him a sitting duck. Even if somebody, I always throw these caveats out there because I like to cover all my bases, and honestly so. Even if someone out there that does believe stubbornly that Oswald acted alone, one man did it. Okay, have your one man did it. Kennedy should have lived. Because again, and this opens up another can of worms. You're talking about the motorcade route and why they shouldn't have went that way. Well, another situation is like another discovery of mine, and it is what it is. I don't lay any great claim to it just because by default no one looked at this before. Found out that building rooftops were normally guarded during the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy eras. Yes, basically from the 1930s through the early 1960s. Most people think, oh, that was because of the assassination, right? They started to tighten up security. It's only after the assassination they guarded rooftops. Fine, I know it isn't. I had to pay fee to go to newspaper archives, and I have them all on my Facebook, and sometimes they're even reprinted in some of my books. The actual newspaper articles, and actual documents themselves, and Secret Service testimony. And what it boils down to is when President Kennedy visited other towns in America in 1961, 62, 63, when FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower visited other cities and countries and whatnot, agents or police or military guarded multi-story buildings. And obviously, they didn't guard every single rooftop. What they did was they would go for multi-story buildings. And single ranch dwelling type buildings were guarded by the street level. Street level police and or military and or Secret Service agents could guard those. But anything of a high nature, it would be like, for example, when he went to Tampa, the Dallas motorcade was only 11 miles total. Well, in Tampa it was 28 miles long, and yet they guarded every major rooftop. Okay, and they had agents on the back of the limousine. They were going at a fast rate of speed. They had good intelligence about threats. A military officer rode between the driver and the agent in the passenger seat. And there's a reason why Kennedy lived on other trips. It wasn't just good old luck and rubbing a rabbit's foot. But again, if someone out there still wants to stubbornly cling on to Oswald acting alone, imagine if there would have been officers or military or whatnot on the rooftops in Dealey Plaza. Obviously, they would have spotted them. In fact, tragically, a couple spectators did see two men in the windows of the book depository where Oswald allegedly was. And these poor souls thought, well, those are guards. In fact, the one guy, Arnold Rollin, turned to his wife and said, hey, look, there's a Secret Service guard up there. And they saw two men in the windows. See, even the civilians knew about this procedure before. In fact, the one testified to such that he heard that FDR had this kind of protection. But this was very peaceful. It took years to get these articles out because it's not something you can just Google and, oh, there it is. It took years dredging newspaper archives, microfiche and whatnot, and finding, my God, there was articles that summer of 63 talking about the president is protected well when he leaves Washington, D.C. And it talks about one of the standard procedures is to guard all multi-story building rooftops. And there's a book that came out in 1962. This book's been out of print now for like 40-some years. And what it says in it is anytime the president leaves Washington, D.C., police or officers are on every multi-story building. And again, it was only little old me who paid a lot of money on Amazon to get an out-of-print book on a whim. This could have been a total expensive dud. And turned out I turned to a page and, oh my God, I don't believe this. I can't believe I'm reading. There's no fine print. Sometimes maybe it's like every time the president leaves Washington. And there was just more and more evidence of that. And again, Secret Service documents that only came out in the late 1990s. Show at Tampa, and I spoke to the head motorcycle officer, Russell Groover, said, oh, yeah, we had sheriffs of long arms and submachine guns on every multi-story building Kennedy passed that 28-mile motorcade. If anybody would open a window, any suspicious activity, we would have gone to an alternate route, and that man wouldn't have lived to see another day meeting assassins in a window or whatnot. And again, this is stuff that only came out in the last X amount of years because of little old me, interviewing these guys and going through documents and whatnot, because, again, I always think about Robert Groves, probably one of the most famous authors on this case, in JFK assassination case. And he turned to me and said, well, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. Vince, I never really thought to look at them before. And yeah, there you go. There's more we can get into. We can get into the case for conspiracy as well. But just in an overview, that's for your listeners, that's what it is. Everybody's eye was taken off the ball because most people view the Secret Service as admirable. Well, and right, you say, well, these are the guys that are guarding the president. They're good guys. Why would they do anything? But again, it's only a few bad apples. A couple guys that didn't like President Kennedy for his foreign policy in Cuba and Vietnam, didn't like him on civil rights. Back then, it was a real issue about blacks and whites intermingling. It is what it is. And also, and they're on record on this, several agents are on record about being angry at President Kennedy for his personal life. As most people know, President Kennedy, with all faults, one of his faults was that he had mistresses, and he fooled around. Well, back in the early 60s, divorce was like the scarlet letter isn't like it is now. Divorce was a dirty word, and adultery was as well. And when some of these agents, and again, this is right from their own mouths, there's actually a 1997 a documentary was on ABC. Several of these agents spoke about it. They were angry at the president, mad at his behavior. And he said this opened them up to blackmail and whatnot. And one of the agents who was mad at President Kennedy was Tim McIntyre, who rode feet behind Kennedy on the Secret Service follow-up car. Makes you think, wow, those shots rang out. I wonder if that anger at President Kennedy had made him think about something. And interestingly, Tim McIntyre, his good friend Emory Roberts, who was the agent in charge of those agents in that follow-up car, he went on to do something, this is no exaggeration, he went on to perform a duty no other Secret Service agent has done since 1865 when the agency came into being after the Lincoln assassination. And that is, while he was still an active Secret Service agent, he became President Lyndon Johnson's appointment secretary. He was doing it at the same time. And again, it was this little me discovers no one ever wrote about it or anything. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I was reading these articles saying that, the press was wondering, basically, what was this agent taking the place of Dave Powers, who was JFK's loyal aide, and starting to book appointments for the Japanese ambassador and whatnot. What that means for your listeners is, wow, okay, the shots ring out, and you have the agents who are mad at President Kennedy for his personal life, interesting, and then you have the agent in charge of those agents. It's their boss, tell them to maybe use common sense, lunge forward, protect the man. And not only did he harbor the same feelings, becomes JFK's successor's appointment secretary, something no other agent before or since has ever done. The Secret Service is supposed to be apolitical. They're not supposed to be part of the administration, Democrat or Republican. They're there to guard the president, whether they like him or hate him, Democrat or Republican. It has nothing to do with anything. They're there as just straight, indifferent bodyguards. And it's just really alarming that this guy, you think about reward. They want to see a Texan in the White House, maybe who'd be tougher on Vietnam and communists and Cuba, and maybe wouldn't follow some of the dangers past President Kennedy did with his private life. Like you said, I'm a big fan of President Kennedy, admirer, but it is what it is. I mean, he definitely had a secret dark side when it came to affairs and whatnot. And again, some of these men are on record having those feelings. And when you think about some of the Secret Service deficiencies about security in Dallas, it definitely makes you think, wow, motive. Motive is the reason for an action. Why we all do certain things or not do certain things. Think about it, put it in people's terms. If you don't like your boss, you're going to do certain things, and maybe you won't do certain other things or do it in a timely fashion, or maybe you privately wish someone else was boss. Well, again, that's what it comes down to. The fatal shots ring out. The Secret Service basically had 6 to 8 seconds. They had a souped-up limousine to hit the gas. They had all the protective functions. They had their common sense and training. And yes, the men were trained very well back then. It's not like I'm not looking at the Secret Service through current eyes, because now this president rides in they call it the Beast. It's a heavily armored anti-aircraft missile could hit it. Nothing will happen. I'm viewing strictly Secret Service procedures in time from FDR, including JFK. I am saying that President Kennedy should have lived in. It's sad for me to say, but it's basically comes down to these agents doing things and not doing things and blaming the president. And we can go further from that. We can go into a case for conspiracy. Anything you want to ask me, that's fine. Yeah.
So, do you think? I know, obviously, it sounds like you believe there was some serious incompetence,
Yes.
On the side of the Secret Service. As far as Oswald is concerned, do you think he acted alone, acted with somebody else, or wasn't involved at all?
Well, this is coming out in my book coming out early next year. I wish it was coming out this year. That's another story. It's all publishing schedules. But I offer a monkey wrench on a lot of people think, did Oswald act alone? Did he do it? Didn't he do it? Was he in concert with someone else? And what I've uncovered, and I document this in the book, that Oswald's rifle was guilty, but not Oswald. Oswald was safely down in the second floor lunchroom, like he said in his notes. Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police interviewed him, and these notes didn't come forward until decades later. It used to be standard line was, the Dallas Police didn't record his statements. But it turns out he did after all. Scribbled notes came out after the Assassination Records Review Board released notes and dockets and whatnot. It's like, wow, here's Oswald's alibi right there. It confirms what he told other officers that everybody kind of took as like, Yeah, it's just him saying it because he's trying to cover his tracks. But Will Fritz actually has in his notes that Oswald said, he was on the second floor eating his lunch. He went to go get a Coca-Cola, and that's when an officer rushed in less than 90 seconds after the assassination, mind you, had his pistol on Oswald, and that's when Roy Truby, Oswald's boss, said, oh, he's good, he works here, and they went on. So not only did Oswald have to fire the shots by himself, which I don't believe he would have acted alone anyway. I definitely believe there was a shot to the front. We'll get into that in a moment. But even if Sealer thinks that Oswald acted on his own, he had less than 90 seconds to get through the book. Here's another thing. It's really amazing. Barry Ernest, an author of an amazing book, The Girl on the Stairs, this only came out in the last 6 years or so. He interviewed a couple of the women workers who worked in the book depository. Well, there was wooden steps, very creaky and noisy wooden steps going down from the 6th floor to the 1st floor. Anybody would have saw or heard Oswald a mile away, and these women didn't see him or hear anybody else that mattered. These their high heels were unbelievable. The sound of those wooden creaky steps, you could not, if in your life depended on it, sneak down. And Oswald had to run for his life to meet the police officer, so to speak, who was going to have a gun on him. And these women said, no, he wasn't there. There's other evidence, but just in the interest of time, I will tell you that that's my belief, that Oswald's rifle was used to track him. So when people say, oh, the ballistics show that some of those fragments came from Oswald's gun to the exclusion of all other weapons. Well, yeah, no, of course they want to frame Oswald. Of course it's going to connect to Oswald. Who else? But his weapon was used, but Oswald was safely down on the 2nd floor, and there was also a shooter in front to have that crossfire, which obviously 2 or more people involved. It's a conspiracy. And Oswald definitely was what he said he was. He was a patsy. But that also solves it as far as the little wrinkle that, wow, Vince, the ballistics do show that some of the fragments came from Oswald's rifle. How do you explain that? And for years, people were tied up in knots. They would always go, oh, that rifle was a terrible rifle. And, oh, there's no way you could have fired that many shots in, 6 to 8 seconds. And my thing is, again, for years of research, and I document in the new book coming up, and that's why it's thrown researchers off for decades. They're always trying to find an excuse that Oswald couldn't have used the rifle. My thought is a professional rifleman did use that weapon to tie it back to him when he was safely down the 2nd floor. And again, I think there was definitely a shooter from the front. Anybody sees a Zapruder film, even common sense would dictate my wife's not a researcher at all, and her first thought when she saw that film was, my God, he shot from the front. It looks like an invisible baseball bat knocks him backwards to the left. Anybody who's seen the JFK movie with Kevin Costner and whatnot, the famous line, back into the left like a mantra. Kept on showing that clip of the Zapruder film. When that came forward on ABC TV in 1975, that led to the second major government investigation. Water coolers around America the next morning where people were saying, there's no way in the world Oswald or anybody else acted alone from the rear. He flew backwards. I mean, I just so many deer hunters when I tell them, oh, there's no way a guy's going to go back towards the shooter. I mean, it's in that amount of time too. So it's a combination of all that. And and then you get into the medical evidence, which is my second book, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda. I interviewed and corresponded a lot of Parkland doctors and nurses, medical people on both sides, the ones that tried to in vain to save his life, and also the ones that did the autopsy. And the preponderance of the evidence is President Kennedy had the wound in the right rear of his head, an exit wound. Entrance wounds leave small holes. Exit wounds leave large holes. And the vast majority of them were saying the back of President Kennedy's head was gone. So that matches the Zapruder film flying backward to the left. Witnesses saw smoke. Okay, it's about like 6 or 8, like closer to 8 witnesses. I document this in the book. Saw smoke on the knoll, okay? More importantly, if anybody out there thinks, oh, maybe that was cigarette smoke or something that's silly timed with the assassination, these same witnesses smelled gunpowder. There's no way in a matter of moments that smoke could have got all the way from the book depository, X amount of feet up on the 6th floor, and traveled down in milliseconds down to street level, and they smelled the smoke, they saw the smoke, and most of the witnesses conversional ran that way. Interestingly, no one checked the trunks of the cars. They said they saw muddy footprints and cigarette butts, like someone standing there for a long time. Well, it would have been very easy for a gunman or gunmen to escape. You just do the shooting and you jump into the trunk, have a comrade if you don't just do it yourself and shut the trunk. You got to keep in mind, it's a very naive time. This is back when people didn't lock the doors and people didn't have the suspicions of government and whatnot. It would have been very easy to jump in the trunk, boom, in milliseconds, whatever. You're safe and sound. Everyone's milling about and looking for ghosts on the grassy knoll, and they're long gone because they're in the trunks trunk or trunks of the car. So that's something no one's really ever thought about before in any great depth. And again, it's the preponderance of the medical evidence. And you might say to yourself, wow, the preponderance of the medical evidence is showing he was shot from the front. Well, why didn't the government? The government always said that, oh, it's a matter of interpretation. And they looked at the photos and x-rays because obviously no one had the body anymore. But the witnesses that actually saw the body said, no, the right rear of his head was gone. It looked like the entrance wound was in the throat as well. So you had an entrance wound here, evidence of an exit wound in the back of the head. Well, that's obviously at least one, if not two shots from the front. And how the government did this was that they sequestered the autopsy photos and x-rays ostensibly for taste reasons for decades. So no one could see the autopsy photos and x-rays. We just had some government experts who testified for them, said, oh, yeah, these photos and x-rays, they confirm the Warren Commission. And when you're a naive citizen, you're going to believe it because you have no evidence to say otherwise. Okay, well, that's what they said, end of story. Well, the Haas Select Committee did something that was criminal. The Haas Select Committee was the second government investigation. What they did was they interviewed a lot of medical people that said, oh, the back of President Kennedy's head was gone and it looked like he was shot from the front. They buried those records for 50 years. They were not to come out to like basically 2029, and only because of the Assassination Records Review Board, which came about because of the JFK movie. Millions of citizens were outraged and wrote their congressmen and senators saying, get those JFK files released. We found out the House Select Committee lied, and actually two prominent members of the House Select Committee came out in the late 90s, early millennium and said, you know what, if we would have knew that that statement was on our report, I didn't know who wrote that, it's false. What they said in the report was, in contrast to these people that claim that the back of the head was gone and whatnot, we have the witnesses from Bethesda and Parkland, and their testimonies match up, and there was no discrepancy. I'm paraphrasing. But basically what it boils down to is they threw a huge wet blanket, and it lasted for years. People said, wow. Now there's that tantalizing testimony in the Warren Commission about all these doctors saying he was shot from the front, either directly or indirectly, or saying the medical evidence or something said it looked like he was shot from the front. But then you got to weigh and consider the House Select Committee. They said what they said during the reinvestigation. That kind of throws a monkey wrench in things. Well, when those interviews and drawings came out, we said, my God, they matched the Parkland doctors, the people on the Bethesda, and also the back of the head was gone. He had an entrance wound. He was shot from the front. But again, this is piecemeal. Years later, when researchers looking at the mainstream media largely ignored this. But what it means is you had prominent people on both ends of the line, trained medical people, that's saying directly or indirectly that President Kennedy was shot from the front. Again, it's a matter of, I always tell people, it's like what Kevin Costner's character says in the Oliver Stone movie. He says, oh, well, you know what? The point is lost, and it's buried, and evidently the whole significance gets lost in a mountain of details. It's there, but until you pull it all together, it looks like, oh, this is just one guy saying this. No, this one guy alleges this. This one guy alleges that. But when you put it all together, you say, wow, it's like a landslide. The majority of people say he shot from the front. You got the majority of people in Daily Planet saying he shot from the front. Why would those witnesses all say puffs of smoke on the grassy knoll? Why would they smell gunpowder? Why did the Secret Service do this, do that? And we didn't know for decades later, the mortal enemies of President Kennedy, and didn't want, a second term, didn't want, Vietnam, didn't want Vietnam, ended, so to speak. They wanted Cuba. They wanted, a successful invasion because they were mad about what happened to bad pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's left to amateurs. It's left to authors and people like me out there in the wilderness who, studied this. And no, we made inroads. The good news is, the average opinion polls out there have shown for years the American public's on our side. They believe there's a conspiracy. But, people have their own normal day-to-day lives, and this, that, and the other. It's X amount of years later. There's only so much you can ask the public to do. They'll buy the books, they'll read, they'll be interested. But, like Pete Hamill, who's a journalist who dated Jacqueline Kennedy, he said something very profound. He said if there was a conspiracy, they got away with it. Jack Kennedy's dead, Ruby's dead, Oswald's dead. It's because so much time has passed now. So many people are dead. It's really left to make a good record of history. But as far as any justice being done, it's too late for justice. It's never too late for the truth, but it's never too late for justice. And I guess that's why people carry on and do what they do. So
I don't want you to give away too much of your book, but I got a question about, you say you don't think Oswald, you think he was a patsy, you think he was a scapegoat for somebody.
Definitely.
So why was he picked as the scapegoat or the patsy?
It was definitely his background. He was just tailor-made for being a patsy. He was a guy that ostensibly defected to the Soviet Union. As anybody knows, studying their history of the late 50s, early 60s, the post-McCarthy era, being called a red a communist, better dead than red, led to suicides. Your career was ruined and whatnot. Being called a red back then would be fighting words or worse. So you had at the time he was serving in the Marines, of the four branch of the Marines. Those are some tough mothers, and he's at the same time studying the Russian language. His fellow Marines were calling him Oswaldskovich and everything instead of beating the hell out of him. My brother served in the Navy. Said if that would have been somebody in my bunker, they would have beat the hell out of him. And yet he's studying Russian language during the height of the Cold War, when every moment we're worried about Russia bombing us and vice versa. And this guy's in the Marines, and he's spotting communist dogma and learning, the Russian language. But to get to the heart of the matter, you might say, well, so far of it, that sounds like he's a communist, like a lunatic. But the thing is, there's two sides to Oswald everywhere you turn. It turns out that there was a fake defector program going on. No one disputes this. This is a fact. The CIA was running, what they were doing was trying to fool the KGB, the Russians, and have these men look like they were expatriates, like, oh, they were tired with the capitalist system in America. They wanted to try communism on. So they had one of them was Robert Webster, famous one, who defected in quotes right around the time of Oswald. And what the story was is some of these men went over there, and their thing was to try to make it look like, oh, okay, this guy, he defected, he's a nut, but what he's really trying to do is gain intelligence for the U.S. government, and that's what they were doing. Oswald comes back to America in 1962, and what he does is he starts espousing pro-Castro feelings, but he's hanging around with anti-communists. He starts fights in New Orleans with anti-Castro Cubans after trying to join pro-Castro elements. He's playing both sides of the fence, and the people he's playing both sides of the fence with have deep CIA connections, deep military intelligence backgrounds. One was a former FBI agent. It wasn't just like the local lunatic society. These people they just happened to have government connections and happened to be enemies of Kennedy and happened to be training anti-Castro Cubans for a second invasion of Cuba and Castro at the same time. So it's very disturbing at Oswald. The standard line from the Warren Commission was Oswald was a lone nut. He was a loner. He was a loser. At a time when a lot of people were still living in their parents' basement, he was only 24. He was a former Marine, okay? He was married. He had affairs with women in Russia, too. He had two beautiful daughters, okay? He knew the Russian language. He was a radar operator at Tsugi Air Station in Tokyo, which you have to have a top secret clearance for, going into the U-2 spy flights over Russia and Cuba and whatnot. He was privy to all that. So, and then the people he was hanging around, he was no loner, far from a loner. He was around a lot of people. So the Warren Commission was dead wrong. They choose not to look at any of these people. And keep in mind, to be fair to the Warren Commission, if I can, some of this information didn't come out till years later. But the information they did have should have been enough to say something was amiss. But the Warren Commission was under a deadline, like, okay, the 1964 election's coming up. Let's get this behind us. Kennedy's dead. Let's just blame it on Oswald. It's time to move on. And everyone was distracted by the Vietnam War, Beatlemania, and life went on, and this, that, and the other. We can't bring Kennedy back, and that's what it was. But to answer your question directly, yeah, Oswald was definitely the patsy he said he was. And here's the other thing, too, common sense. Every political assassin in world history, not just U.S. history, has not only not denied doing it, they've proudly boasted, I did this for the working man, like the two Puerto Rican nationalists who tried to kill Truman. That is a conspiracy. Two people, they didn't deny it. The one was killed, but in notes in advance and talking to associates. Oh, no, there was a plot to kill Truman. And the other guy said, oh, yeah, we did this for the working people. We didn't like President Truman's views on Puerto Rico. And, John Wilkes Booth was a lone shooter, but there was a conspiracy behind him. But he never denies. I mean, it's their world history. Their whole reason of not denying it is because they want to ascribe a meaning to their deed.
Right.
I did this for this, that, and the other. And Oswald is adamantly denying it literally to his dying breath. In fact, when he was shot by Ruby, he was dying on the emergency table. There was actually a couple episodes where the police were saying, son, Jim Lavelle said, son, it doesn't look good for you. Do you have any last words? And he shook his head no. Right before he died, he had a chance to come clean and said, yeah, I did it, or this, and he just shook his head no, that he didn't do it. So why would he do it? And he had nothing to lose at that point. He was going to be dying. Just admit it. He did it. And he's denying it. And that's the thing. And then you go to Jack Ruby, the guy who shot Oswald, okay? He's got deep mafia connections. Now, to be fair, the second government investigation, they did reveal that. They said this was not a fluke. He had police help, Ruby did, in getting to the Dallas police station. And the story was, well, they didn't want Oswald was supposedly a cop killer, too, and they wanted to make sure that he had some vengeance, Dallas vengeance. But obviously, most people would say, wow, so Oswald didn't get just to go to trial and be safely in the county jail, and then he could reveal everything he knew, huh? But yet, and yet when he, every time he's before millions of people and the television cameras and all the reports, do you have anything to say in your defense? Do you have anything to say? He would say, I emphatically deny these charges. I don't know what dispatches you people are given. I've committed no acts of violence. I'm just a patsy. They're all taking me in because of the fact I live in the Soviet Union. One reporter asked him, so you worked in the building? Well, of course, sir. I worked in that building. Yes, I did. And the thing is, he worked in the building with like 75, 80 other employees. He was not the only one missing, too. That's a big myth. But, he was the only one missing. There was no building roll call. There was different departments in that book depository. There's people that know each other than maybe to see. And when the assassination happened, a lot of people said, well, that's obviously, we're not going back to work. It's like 9/11. Some people just think, well, I guess we're not going back to work. Huh? The country's under attack. Well, a lot of people thought our president's been murdered in our city. I don't think anybody's going to want to go back to work. So a lot of people did that. But afterwards, it was thrown on Oswald. Oh, Oswald escaped. He had a terrible way of escaping. He let a reporter, who he thought was a Secret Service agent, enter the building calmly. He calmly walked up the stairs. He takes a bus. When the bus gets stopped in the traffic, he walks out, offers a cab to a lady, an old lady. The old lady says, no, it's okay. And he gets in the cab instead. Wait a minute, he just on his own foot. By running, he would have had a better escape plan than just doing all that. It was a comedy of errors. He came back to Dealey Plaza at one point. His escape was terrible if he was trying to escape. It makes no sense. The thing is, the logic of everything, I can accept that a lone person can do things. I mean, John Hinckley, took a pot shot at Reagan. Squeaky Fromm took a pot shot at Gerald Ford. I don't see conspiracies in my soup. In fact, I rain on a lot of people's parade. I don't think 9/11 was the big thing people think. That's another topic. So I don't see like, this is a conspiracy, this conspiracy. If there's no evidence, it's the end of the ball game. And here with the Kennedy assassination, there's a lot of evidence that there was a conspiracy. But again, you have to take the time and energy to investigate it. And, the American public only has so much. That's why the Oliver Stone movie was so popular, because it was an audiovisual entertainment farrago. You had all these famous, actors and actresses. It was 2.5 hours. It was like, in this soundbite era we live in. Oh, there you go. That achieved more than hundreds of books did. People left the theater, but what did they do when they left the theater? They said, wow, there was definitely a conspiracy. Hey, what time's the Dallas Cowboys play tomorrow? Yeah. See, that's the average mentality. They believe there's a conspiracy. Hell of a movie. But at the end of the day, hey, what time's the game on tomorrow? See, you only invest. I don't even insult the American public. It is what it is. People have their own lives and own thoughts. But the good thing is about the movie. Now, the one thing I'll give the public a lot of credit is they did write to the congressmen and senators to get the files released. They were mad because there was at the very end of the movie, Oliver Stone was clever. He said that the files of the assassination committee will not be released until the year 2017 in the movie, something like that. The point was, this was 1991 at the time, and it was like generation later. So it was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so the thought was, Oswald had to learn, why are we burying millions of pages of documents? And even Ted Kennedy, President Kennedy's brother at the time, was all for releasing the files. He didn't want to see the movie. The movie was too painful. He said, but I'm all for the files being released. And again, when these files were released, it helped somebody like me because, well, the Secret Service is another issue in itself. The Secret Service destroyed records of presidential trips, and they did it against a violation of the law. The Assassination Records Review Board asked for these documents. They said, we want to see these prior trip files. They shredded them all. So if you talk about a smoking gun and why the hell would they do something like that, that's another issue. But the ones that did survive the shredder and the evidence that has come out goes against official history. But again, a lot of people weren't looking at it. So
I've got a question for you, Vince. There's been thousands of books written in the last 50 plus years. Everything from the CIA to LBJ. There's a number of different theories. Do you think that a lot of these are possibly just almost done as disinformation to muddy the waters, to keep people from zoning in and asking the right questions that could possibly expose the truth?
Man, you guys ask good questions, man. That's a hell of a question. Yeah, to answer your question, first thing would say yes. Now, specifics on that would be, the good news is some of the books in the last 5 to 10 years have been some of the best books ever written on this case. Inside the Assassination Records Review Board by Doug Horn, a 5-volume series, tremendous. JFK and the Unspeakable by Jim Douglas. The JFK Assassination by Jim DiEugenio is fantastic. The Girl on the Stairs by Barry Hearn. Some of the best books have been released in the last 5 to 10 years. That's the good news. But to follow on your question, you're absolutely right. There's also been disinformation, either innocent disinformation. It was a well-meaning author, but they were just going down a rabbit hole. They were dead wrong. I'll give you a perfect example of one where it's a well-meaning researcher author. Is the theory that George Hickey, the agent in the flop car behind Kennedy, accidentally shot Kennedy? You might have heard that. It was on the Reels Network. It was called The Smoking Gun. There was also a book. Actually, it was 2 books. Mortal Wearer, best-selling book in the early 90s by Howard Donahue and Bonar Menninger. And it came out again on the Reels Television Network. A very popular documentary came out in 2013. It was based on Colin McLaren, who took up for Howard Donahue, passed away. And their whole thesis was, wow, we solved the assassination. Oswald fired from the rear, but he missed the fatal shot. The fatal shot was an accident. It was an accident by a Secret Service agent in the rear of the limousine that just did this because he was trying to fire on Oswald and the gun slipped. Well, there's a film by a bystander, Bronson film, no relation to Charles Bronson, the actor, but his name's Charles Bronson. Really. And so starts off of Eastwood Bronson. But anyway, in that film, the agent didn't stand up with a gun, didn't fire the bullet. Okay, that's everything. Then you got the witness testimony and eyewitness evidence. No one has ever come forward and alleged this agent supposedly did what he did. What it boils down to answer your question, is this was, I think, innocent disinformation. What it was Howard Donahue, who was the leader of this theory, basically believed his government. He worked in the government. And he said, there's no way our government could have been involved. But there's no way that what he's agreeing with conspiracy theories is this ballistic evidence. There's no way Oswald acted alone. This government investigator is agreeing. You're right. There's no way Oswald fired a fatal bullet. He had to put an innocent spin on it. And his innocent spin was, well, it was a Secret Service accident. So it was an accident mixed with Oswald, and that's how you get it. Then you got the silly things I won't even go into detail about, but this terrible stuff that Jacqueline Kennedy wanted President Kennedy dead because of his affairs. You had Bill Greer, the driver of the limousine. Well, I do believe he's the suspect in the assassination. I don't believe he shot President Kennedy. That's a theory that will not die. I've had so many well-meaning people say, hey, Vince, I think the driver of Kennedy's car turned around and shot him. No truth to it whatsoever. Films and photos show he had 2 hands of steering wheel. He had no weapon in his hand. No credible witnesses have testified to it. There's a lot of other evidence. But the point being is you got 2 sides of disinformation. You got the well-meaning kind where the guy is not trying to hurt people. He just thinks that this theory is correct. It's not. That confuses the public. Then you got these silly theories that have to be disinformation. It's people that didn't like President Kennedy are trying to lay something out, like what President Kennedy's affairs is the reason why he was killed. And Jacqueline Kennedy had something to do with it, which is so obscene. His wife, the mother of his 2 children, had something to do with it. I mean, it's so terrible. What it does, it confuses the public. See, when the Oliver Stone movie came out, I tell you, that was a real unbelievable period in a good way, because you had, knowing the theater goers going to this movie was very popular. You had a ton of books coming out, but the bad news is you had books of competing theories. I think that's what actually burned the public out. Oh, this book says the FBI did. This book says the CIA did. This book says it was some gunman on the grassy knoll who had no connection to anybody. And so after a while, people just threw their heads up and said, I believe there's a conspiracy, but I'm confused. And see, the thing what it was is that was before the internet really kicked in. There was computer messaging boards based on the days of typewriter, snail mail, and just people sharing things word of mouth. Well, it wasn't until after the late 90s, early millennium, when things really got cooking, when all those millions of documents were released, and people did primary research, actually spoke to witnesses, did responsible historical work, that we got the books I mentioned earlier are tremendous because they're documented like a factual historical book. It's not like, oh, this is some crackpot theory. There's no crackpot theory. That days of theorizing is over. It's all based on eyewitness testimony, interviews, documents, films, things that people can actually hold up and weigh and consider. And so the case for conspiracy is alive and well. It's a shame. If this evidence would have been known to the public years ago, yeah, I think something would have been done. Back when Jacqueline Kennedy was still alive, back when John Jr. was still alive, back when Governor Connolly was still alive, Ted Kennedy. But so many people passed on. It's now went from current events to history. And the one thing I will say is a little asterisk to all this, why it's not ancient history, and this is why this is still amazing, is that my area is the Secret Service, and I interviewed a lot of former agents now. A lot of them have passed on, but there's still a fair amount of them still alive. Two of them are best-selling authors, Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, who've traveled the world, and their thing is blaming the assassination on the president, meaning they believe Oswald acted alone. If it wasn't for Kennedy ordering us away from the car and doing this, that, and the other, we would have been able to protect him. It's foul. It's untrue. But that's why, in my mind, it's still a current event, because these guys are still alive and ticking, and they're traveling the world. And they're spreading this pablum. Now, the good thing is, I guess I'm making inroads for a small publisher type of author type of deal, because, well, I'm not in the major leagues. I'm like, it's like double A ball, making an analogy for people out there. And my message is getting through, because people are saying, you read these articles saying, well, according to Vince Palamara, this Clint Hill's wrong about this and that and that. So I'm making some inroads, but to me, that's why it's still a current event to me, because I got two sad old men out there who are making blood money. They're making millions. Like, I work for a living. These guys are, it's no hyperbole. Let's just say they're making a ton of coin. I'll just say that. They're the biggest publisher in the world. They're traveling the world. Their books sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Do the math. I mean, it's a lot of money they made. And the thing is, I could live with it if it was factual, but when they're talking about the assassination of President Kennedy, it's anything but. It's foul. In fact, Gerald Blaine, the one author, former agent, he's on record with me years before his book came out, agreeing with all his colleagues that President Kennedy never ordered us to do anything, never had a harsh word, never ordered us off the back of a car. Well, when he realized, in fact, in the interest of time, we can get into this briefly if you want, but I just take credit for it because it is what it is. I don't think it's like a big ego trip that I'm responsible for these two guys coming out of the woodwork, coming out of the wilderness, out of retirement, writing their books. They saw what I had to write on the internet, and they were mad as hell. They were mad as hell because I was showing the truth of all their colleagues. And I wrote a 22-page letter to Clint Hill in 2005 when he was long retired, had no interest in dealing with authors and anything. And he was livid at my letter, because my letter basically said in a respectful way, and I showed all the agents I spoke to and interviewed and corresponded. I said, Mr. Hill, sir, it's a shame that President Kennedy died. It's a shame. You shouldn't have any blame for this yourself personally, because if your superiors didn't throw this mythology that President Kennedy ordered you guys off the car, your supervisors wouldn't have hamstrung you and handicapped you from doing your duty that day. Well, they were livid. And out of nowhere, I read the trade papers, and Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill come out with books, and they got the #1 publisher in the world, and these weren't even like tried and true authors. It was first time out of the gate, and they got major publishers. They were on all the major networks, Fox, CNN, the list goes on. And I had a lot of petty harassment from friends and associates of them and that. And they had a Hollywood movie in the works, and I was able to scuttle that, which they weren't too thrilled with. But they actually had a Hollywood movie in the works, and they were going to have actors who were going to do this whole big shenanigans about, oh, President Kennedy didn't want us on the car, and didn't want the bubble top, and all the drama. And what would the American public do? They'd see this movie and go, wow, I guess President Kennedy had it coming to him. He didn't want that security, Maybe that's a shame, but he had it coming to him in a way because he didn't want this, that, and the other done. See the damage this can do? That's why it's still a current event in my eyes, at least in the Secret Service. You got two guys traveling the world. Like I always tell people, that's one of my standard conference lecture lines, that for me, it's not ancient history, because as long as those two guys are going around traveling the world, making money on their books and doing what they're doing, I have to be out there to counter it, because, I can't have a clean conscience, because I knew what all their – and see, the thing is, these two guys were privates. Their bosses, the generals, so to speak, were telling me something totally different. And it wasn't like anybody was throwing a monkey wrench. They were all telling me the same thing. Saying, oh, President Kennedy never ordered us to do anything. And again, like what you were saying earlier, even if he would have ordered them, the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States really had. So there you go. So this, for your listeners, I'll just say that, Kennedy was left a sitting duck, and there was a conspiracy. And conspiracy or no conspiracy, these agents would have done their normal professional job. Kennedy lives. And that's basically, the thrust of my research. Yeah.
Vince, I got a couple questions. One, like, how long were you doing the research before you were like, oh, man, I'm onto something? Like, how long did that take?
In its embryonic stages, it was about a year or two, because keep in mind, I was in my early 20s, and I believed it first. You do. It's just naive. There's something about the power of print. And you're reading something in the Warren Commission report, the official government reports, and they're claiming that President Kennedy didn't want the agents on the back of the car, didn't want the bubble top, didn't want the motorcycles to the car. You believe them. I mean, it's the power of print really does have a lot to do with it. So to answer your question, the first couple of years, I begrudgingly believed all that, and I just thought, well, the Secret Service still should have protected them better anyway. And the common sense, even most people, like Howard Willens, who served on the Warren Commission staff, even wrote to me in 2013, I agree the Secret Service should have did more to protect the president. Vince Palamara, who believed Oswald acted alone, wrote me a letter, said the same thing. I agree with you. The Secret Service should have did more to protect the president. What my turning point was, to answer your question directly, September 27th, 1992 was a date which will live in infamy with me. This is when everything changed. Came back from a trip to Cancun, Mexico with my parents, and I said, you know what, I'm going to contact more of these Secret Service agents. I got to get it on record. I got to clean my conscience, because I even told my parents on the flight home, this could be the end of everything, because if they tell me otherwise, then it's a wrap. I mean, you can go of negligence only so far. You're not going to write a book about negligence. I mean, that's all Monday morning quarterbacking. You don't know. You have nothing primary. So that day, I spoke to several agents, and the one in particular was Gerald Bain, I mentioned earlier in the presentation here. Gerald Bain was the number one agent of the White House detail, not a buck private. He was in charge of all the agents under him. He was there from FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. He had Kennedy's ear, this guy. If you see newsreels of Kennedy, chances are you're going to see Gerald Bain standing behind him. And he was Clint Hill's boss, Gerald Bain's boss, those two agent authors I spoke to. Well, I ran it past him, no matter of factly, expecting to tell me what these books told me. I said, yeah, I was reading William Manchester's Death of the President, the Warren Report. And yeah, I know that President Kennedy ordered you gentlemen off the back of the car, and I was about to say something else, and that's when he interrupted me. He said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. And I was just flabbergasted. In fact, thank God he let me tape him. 7 months later, he died. If anybody wants to go to my YouTube channel, you'll hear these agents speaking literally from the grave now. They're all passed away. But thank the Lord that I was able to tape record them too, because people would say, Vince, how do we know he really said that? So that's why thank God I did that, because, skeptics, even though this is powerful information, you got the other side of the coin. How do we know you're not just making this up, Vince? You always got to think like a lawyer. That's why I always think about these things. And thank God you can actually hear me like stutter on the tape, because I was like, that's my point. I remember I turned and read, and I can't believe you just said that to me. And I said, yeah, you were on the trip to Germany, weren't you? President Kennedy, famous as one of the biggest newsreel clips you'll see of President Kennedy at the Berlin Wall and whatnot. And agents were on the back of the car, very long motorcade. I thought, well, maybe that's an incident. They didn't do that all the time or whatnot. So after I got off the phone with him and collected my thoughts, I was in shock. I said to myself, you got to think about it a little. As I always do that. You got to think about somebody saying, Vince, how do we know this old man wasn't senile? You always got to think about the other side of what you're going to say. I said, well, before I get too excited and write articles and whatnot, I have to calmly keep this to myself. It was tough to do. And contact associates. And again, this is before the internet kicked in. There's computer bulletin boards, but for the most part, the internet, people didn't even know what the heck it was. It was 1992, okay? No one knew what it was. And through directory assistance and newspaper archives, I found an agent in Florida, an agent in Virginia, an agent in California, and no one had a chance to compare notes and look on the internet. It didn't exist. And I just basically said, I'm Vince Palamara, blah, blah, blah. I have some questions for her. Okay, yeah, sure. And they were flattered, too, because I was only in my early 20s, and these guys were all my grandfather. I think they thought some young whippersnappers isn't going anywhere. And to be fair, my book didn't come out until 2013. I never thought it'd be published. So at the time, I really was just an amateur with no axe to grind, really. And one after another, they were all telling me the same thing. Not one person rained on my parade. Not one agent said, yeah, President Kennedy didn't want us off the back of the car. I said, okay, this is unbelievable. They told the exact opposite of the Warren Commission. A few of these agents submitted reports, and they said he did. Now, why all these agents tell me something else? And I look, and again, this is the journey of the years and the decades. I look at films and photos of this trip. Oh my God, they're on the back of the car, the bubble tops there. Oh my God, I found out the building rooftops were normally guarded. How come they didn't do this in Dealey Plaza? And it was one after another. It was all that primary research, and it was documents too. Many documents were only released in the late 1990s. Going through them, I said, oh my God, this is unbelievable. They had the military working in conjunction with the Secret Service, lining the parade route. They had helicopters going with the motorcade itself. In fact, the day before in San Antonio, November 21st, 1963, they had a police helicopter who was traveling the motorcade and actually taking film, too. In fact, everybody's seen the National Geographic show, JFK The Final Hours. You'll see some film clips from the police helicopter of the limousine. And so the $64 million question is, why didn't he do this all in Dallas? It just said, what a coincidence. How he's killed the next day by a lone nut and his security stripped from him. And then add insult to injury. They're blaming him for the assassination after the fact. It worked like a charm. This conspiracy was tremendous because they had the naive gullibility of the public on their side. People just had their newspapers. That was their guide, their Bible. My mom and dad said, well, nobody did research. People just looked at their newspaper, picked up the Pittsburgh Press, the Washington Post, New York Times. They read, this is what this government official said, and that was good enough for them. They were all in grief, and then the rest, life goes on, and it's that it took like junior detectives like me to come out there and many people before me, too, obviously many prominent people before me, and uncover these things and takes patience too. But the good thing is, I could tell for your listeners, we went from an age of theorizing and shooting, in the breeze. Some of these things weren't proved. It used to be the day of theorizing is over, and that day of theorizing ended, I guess, at the turn of the century into the 21st century, when people realized, human testimony and actual documents, things you can hold on to scientifically, that's the way to go to. People don't want to hear your theories about what happened, because if there's no basis for it, theories are just like a wisp in the wind. It doesn't mean anything at the end of the day, because you have no proof for it. And that's why I wrote my book that's coming out, because I always get asked by well-meaning people. I'm into the Secret Service medical evidence. So many people say, Vince, who killed Kennedy? And I never could give them a good answer to that, because my focus is on the Secret Service medical evidence. So I have to answer that question. And that's what this book's coming out about. That's why it's heavily documented. It's all about who I believe killed Kennedy and why, and the evidence of conspiracy and all that stuff. That's what the next one is. Yeah.
So listen, you got to start coming out of your shell a little more and talking a little bit. we need somebody more passionate about what they do. You know what I'm saying?
Hey.
I'm gonna tell you guys the same thing I tell you a lot of times. I realize how big a dummy I am when we get these guys on here. I'm telling you, Vince, man, that was fire, bro.
No, and you're right, because it's so fascinating.
Yes, bro.
Just sitting here, and you kind of know the stories, right? You kind of, you know what the conspiracy is. You know what what's supposed to have happened, but to actually hear about it in that kind of detail with that kind of research is incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I'm a gorilla. I'm an idiot. I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm like, I'm trying my best to keep up.
JD, I think
I'm that way about a lot of other topics. So trust me.
JD, I think you got to ask him the questions. I mean, we got to go one more time at least.
Dude, you're 0 for like 8 right now.
I know, but I don't know. I got a good feeling about Vince. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, hold on. Let's let him. You got a book coming out. You said it's going to be next month. What are the books you got out right now?
It's coming out early next year, and like I always tell people, I wish it was coming out this year, but publisher's schedule, I have no control over it. The best they could do is next year, and it's coming out early next year. Luckily, not late next year. It's called Honest Answers About the Murder of President Kennedy. And again, it stems from my cousin asking me an innocent question, because Vince, who killed Kennedy? And I said, damn, you know what? I'm so busy proving a conspiracy and so busy interviewing the Secret Service agents that I never really focused on specifically who, because I could never prove who did it and why. And I have a general idea, but never. I got to write a book about this. And another thing too, so many books, without naming any names, there are a lot of books that are crap. There's a lot of great books, but there's a lot of books that are tangential. In other words, you'll get a 500-page book and 300 pages of it are like, please get to the point. I mean, we have books that just go on and on about President Kennedy's administration. Okay, it's interesting, but there's 400 books about his administration. We talk about the assassination, who killed Kennedy, and you get a book. And I think what happens is the American public is confused because there's so many books that offer tangential information and don't get to the heart of the matter. In my book, the reason why, okay, Vince, why are we having another book on the assassination? There's already hundreds of books out there. The answer is I wanted to cut through all the bull, and I wanted to get an answer nothing but about the assassination. No tangential stuff about Oswald's biography, Jack Ruby's biography, about the investigations, about President Kennedy's life. There's plenty of that already. Let's just stick to the assassination, who did it and why. Here's the evidence. Here's the forensics. I wanted to show, like the first 2 chapters are 24 indications of conspiracy. So it's not about, it's 100 pages of my journey through the case. That's a good read, but what does that do? I mean, people are like, it's over 50 years later. I think people are tired of people theorizing your personal life. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, your journey. That's real fascinating. And okay, we heard about President Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis for the 2000th time. Can you stick to the assassination? And that's what I wanted to do. As a reader, I'm frustrated too. That's why I said there's a lot of good books. There's always a lot of books where I just want to tear my hair out and say, get to the point. Right. No wonder the public. There's 300 pages of gobbledygook where you just get to the point. This could have been a pamphlet. Instead, it's like 500 pages and so much of like, it's padding. It's about his life, and we already have books on that. So
this
you
me
tell my
friend email.
So when the book comes out or is about to come out, you guys can have me on again for that if you want to.
Absolutely,
yeah, awesome.
So what books do you have now that people where can they find them at?
Yeah, okay. Well, they're all available on Amazon and Kindle and paperback. And if you're lucky, sometimes they're available in actual physical bookstores. Everybody goes to Amazon now. Quickly, it's Survivors Guild, the Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy is the first one. Came out in 2013. Second one is JFK from Parkland to Bethesda. This focuses on the medical evidence. This is like an encyclopedia reference book. This is actually all, again, cutting, no theorizing, no padding. It's literally all the statements of the medical people on both sides, both hospitals. There you go. Yeah, 2015. 2017. Now, this is mainly on the Secret Service, but definitely has chapters relevant to the assassinations, the not-so-Secret Service. It covers FDR to Reagan. And the book, fourth book, came out in 2018, Who's Who in the Secret Service. It's a reference book of the top 100 agents from the McKinley era to current time, Trump. It's the top 100 good, bad, and ugly agents. If anyone, I want to know about these Secret Service agents, the good ones, the bad ones, the not so good ones, and other administrations. This is this one. But again, I thought 4 books was it. In fact, what happened was I had a visit with my one cousin, my wife and I, and as she said, Vince is a well-meaning amateur, but I love it. It really shows you what the average person thinks. Vince, that's interesting what you have to say, but who killed Kennedy? I want to know. And I started to cringe and said, you know what? I don't have a really good answer for it. I have an answer. I don't have a documented answer. I just have the typical answer that a lot of people give. I don't want to give anything away. But yeah, that's why I said I have got to do something. A light bulb went on. I have to write a book that actually documents the case for conspiracy about any tangential issues, that just hammers it and won't let loose and just on the assassination. So that's what I did.
And what was the YouTube channel, Vince, where you can go watch the interviews?
Oh, okay, yeah. If just for your readers, make it real easy. If you just Google my name, Vince Palamara, it's always Palamara. First page of Google, my YouTube comes up, and I mean some music stuff, but it's mainly like a lot of my JFK related stuff. In fact, one of my the first video you get to when you get to my YouTube channel is my presentation in Dallas, which is a really good primer for all my right there. You just go no further than that. And actually include that presentation is some of the audio clips of the Secret Service agents I interviewed. So you got that too. But yeah.
All right.
Cool. All right, JD. Ask him.
Serious stuff. You ready?
Good.
All right. So like this is like Jimmy Don's feelings being hurt a little bit on this show. I ain't gonna lie. Jimmy, true or not?
Oh no, my feelings are totally hurt. I mean, like I'm not even going to act like they're not. I'm like 0 for 5.
I don't think. Have you and Brad been even hanging out at all because of
No,
that?
dude. No, I'm done with him. You can't get with me on this movie. He totally betrayed me on the show that one day, and then I'm 0 for 5 on this question. But go ahead.
But Vince, this is pretty serious stuff I'm about to ask you. All right, we're all big Disney fans. We like Disney. So, Aladdin or Little Mermaid?
I think my wife likes Aladdin. Yeah.
Oh, dude!
Oh,
Here we go. We got
we got to find a different question.
Okay.
I, Vince, am a Little Mermaid guy. I like the redheads. I love Ariel. But nobody is with me. Aladdin is the clear winner, JD. I've been shown over and over and over again.
Vince, appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, Vince, that was cool, man. That was so good. And yeah, when your book comes out, man, if you don't care, we would love to get you back on, talk more about this.
Pleasure, man. Definitely.
And
Sounds good, man.
Cool. And so for our audience that's watching, we'll be back on Sunday doing our regular show. I think JD and I are going to get together here the next couple of days and give away $100 for the 70 shares that we got. We asked for 50 and got 70. That was crazy. But we appreciate you guys doing that. So just a little housekeeping. We're asking everybody to go to YouTube and subscribe to the Just Add Bourbon page. You can find it. You can find all of our videos, all of our.
Share this one.
Yeah, share this one too. Go to YouTube, subscribe. I'm not joking when I say this thing's starting to really take off, and we want to start trying to use the YouTube page to our benefit so we can build our studio and do the different things that we're looking into doing. And of course, Sunday we'll get together and do a regular show. I think we may try to figure out how to do that live if we can. Hopefully, Brad will be able to be back with us. He's still slaving right now, trying to get his store completely going. I guess it's already open, right, Brad? Just trying to get through the first few weeks.
Slam, though. I know that.
Yeah, no doubt, right? So, but of course, you can check our podcast out on Podbean. That's where we launch it from. Of course, here on the Facebook page, iTunes, Spotify. Of course, go to the YouTube page and subscribe. And as we always end our show, from myself, from JD, from Brad, and today, Vince, no matter how bad your week's been, no matter how bad your day's going, if you just add bourbon, it always gets a little bit better. Talk to you guys next week.
Take care. Thanks a lot.